Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and today I'm going to show the 26th game of the book Chess, The Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Miles and Anderssen in Las Palmas in 1980 and the opening played was Fianchetto Opening. This game underscores the importance of coordination over material, patience and planning, flexibility and strategy, exploiting weaknesses, control of key squares and tactical awarenesses. So without further ado, let's begin. White started with g3. Instead of placing pawns in the middle right away, White gets ready to move the bishop near the king, which can still influence the center but from far away. Now Black played c5. Black quickly occupies the center before White has a chance to play d4 and alter the situation. Now White played bishop g2. The bishop targets the weakened d5 square because Black's last move prevents him from forming a pawn chain with c7 to c6 and then d7 to d5. Now Black played knight c6, developing towards the center and focusing on the d4 square. Knight f3. In just 3 moves, he is almost ready to castle. However, without revealing too much, it's worth noting that the white king will ultimately find a much better position than g1. Now Black played g6. Anderssen also chooses to fianchetto. White developed his bishop to e7 after, for example, e6 to bishop e7, then where it would be blocked by the pawn on c5. When there is a long open diagonal inviting it to g7. Now Black played g6 and then White played c3, a good move. White changes his strategy from hypermodern to classical. He thinks it's time to expand his territory and prepares to advance a pawn to d4. Now Black played bishop g7, developing the bishop. Now White played d4, a versatile pawn move that threatens tactically with d takes c5, winning a pawn, poses a threat with d5, displacing the Black knight. It also seizes the control on d4, a strong point for Black in the center, and it limits the activity of the bishop on g7, and it enhances White's influence over the e5 square, another crucial central square. It also opens up space for the queen's bishop to develop. So after d4, Black played c takes d4. The Black pawn chooses to capture its opponent before facing capture itself. Now White played c takes d4. A completely anti-positional move would be knight takes d4 because White aims to keep a pawn in the center. Additionally, with this move, White also frees up the square c3 for the knight on b1. Now d5. Anderssen realizes he needs to place a pawn in the center in a classical manner, otherwise White could disrupt this game with d5. Now knight c3. The knight moves to a strong position and challenges Black to keep copying its move with knight f6. But if Black does that, then knight e5. This would disrupt the symmetry effectively. It threatens to create weak pawn for Black after knight takes c6, b takes c6, and if Black responds with knight takes e5, then knight d takes e5, then this knight will have to go to g4 because it was being attacked by the e5 pawn. So knight g4 and then queen takes d5 gives White a strong control in the center. Even though Black can win the pawn back, in general it's risky for Black to keep copying the opponent's moves because eventually the advantage of moving first becomes significant, maybe even decisive. So after knight c3, now Black played e6. Black wisely avoids the knight f6 variation and protects his d5 pawn differently. However, this is a significant success for white as it now confines black's bishop on c8 within his pawn structure. Now white played a good move, bishop f4, developing the bishop. In contrast, white's queen's bishop is positioned outside his pawn structure. Now black played knight e7. e7 is the second best square for the white knight compared to f6, which means white has acquired another small advantage. Still, knight f6 was better. If now knight e5, then knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and then kingside castle with slight advantage for white, but still better than knight e7. Queen d2. He plans to trade off black's fianchetto bishop, which defends the dark squares on the king side like f6, g7 and h6. If black's knight were ideally placed on f6, he could counter this with the disruptive move knight e4, attacking the queen and thwarting the white strategy entirely. So queen d2, idea bishop to h6 and exchange of the dark squared bishop. Now black played kingside castle. If instead knight f5, then knight b5, idea knight c7 fork, and then kingside castle, and then g4. Drives back the knight and then exchanges bishops with bishop h6 in similar fashion to the game. So black must be content simply to castle. So black played castle. Now white played bishop to h6. White weakens the black king side and confines his opponent's bishop on c8 within its own pawn structure. Now after bishop h6, black played bishop takes h6. Normally inviting an enemy queen near your king isn't advisable, but in this situation black can drive her away with the knight, gaining time. So after queen takes h6, now black played knight f5. So after queen takes h6, the idea was to play knight g5 and then rook e8 and then queen takes h7 check, king f8, queen takes f7, and it's a checkmate. So black played knight f5 and get rid of the queen. White played queen d2. The queen retreats fully since queen f4 and then queen d6 proposes an unwanted queen exchange. Nonetheless, she can take credit for contributing to the weakening of the black king side. Now black played b6. The center being blocked, black has to find another way to develop his c8 bishop. Rook d1. White anticipates queen f6 by black and so overprotects the d4 pawn. Bishop a6. While not a flashy square for the bishop, it does compel white to factor in the pressure on e2 when crafting his strategy. Now h4, another good move by white. With this move, white develops a constructive plan that will make use of the bishop on g2 and the rook on h1. Both would have remained passive had white played kingside castle. The h-pawn will be employed as a battering ram to induce a structural weakness in black's king side. As the American chess genius Pillsbury once said, castle because you want to or because you have to, not just because you can. Now black played knight a5. White's careful opening has succeeded in blunting black's usually keen sense of danger. Black aims to create opportunities on the c file with knight c4, but the rapid developments of the on the king side prevent this from happening. Consequently, the knight ends up stranded on a5. As Tarash once said, if one piece is badly placed, the whole game is bad, or in simpler terms, a knight on the rim is dim. The obvious response to white's last move was h5. to limit the advancement of the rook's pawn. Then white could attempt queen f4 to back up the second wave of the attack with g4, giving him some advantage. Now white played g4, another good move. White is justified in initiating a wing attack since the center is calm. Black can hardly plan a counter attack with e6 to e5. Knight d6. After knight c4, queen c1, a straightforward move recommended by Spielman, followed by b3, and so on, enables white to continue his kingside attack nonetheless. By withdrawing the other knight, Anderssen selects a central square where it doesn't obstruct the queen from defending on f6. If knight e7 were played, then h5 would already appear to be an overwhelming direct assault. So after h5, knight d6, white played h5, a sharp attack on the king side. Queen f6. The queen rushes to the aid for her king. H takes g6, but black is already confronted with a dilemma. Should he permit the opening of the h file, or recapture with the f pawn, potentially weakening his central pawn structure? Black played f takes g6. If h takes g6, then g5, attacking the queen to g7, then knight e5, followed by knight g4, and then knight f6 check, when the vibrant knight forces black to give up his queen. To meet this threat, black would have to play f6. Then g takes f6. His center has been weakened in any case. So black captured with the f pawn. Queen h6, threatening queen takes h7 checkmate. If knight e5 instead of queen h6, then queen takes f2 is a checkmate. So queen h6, and now black played rook f7, stopping checkmate. If queen g7, then queen takes queen, king takes queen, knight g5, with a double threat of knight takes e6 check, and which is a fork, and also rook takes h7 check. Now after rook f7, white played another good move, g5. The importance of a pawn move cannot be overstated, as once made it's irreversible. Although white permits black's knight to reach f5 and obstructs the plan of knight g5, there are several benefits to this move. With one move, white forces the black queen away from the f file, where it's hindering the knight e5 because of the queen takes f2 checkmate. With g5, takes control of f6, establishing a potential outpost for a knight, and it opens up the possibility for bishop h4 to activate the bishop by targeting the vulnerable e6 pawn. So after g5, queen g7. If instead queen e7, then knight e5, rook g7. Here, according to the book, knight takes d5 is better. So knight takes d5, and then e takes d5, then bishop takes d5 check. King f8, knight takes g6, h takes g6, queen h8 check, rook g8, and queen takes g8 mate. And after e takes d5, king h8, then bishop takes a8. But the best move for black after bishop takes d5 is knight f7, blocking the check. And if now knight takes f7 will be a blunder because of queen takes e2 checkmate. So instead of knight takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, rook takes f7, and it's good for black due to material advantage, unsafe position of king, and open lines for black to attack from. So here after rook g7, knight e5 and rook g7, knight takes d5 is better. Then queen e6, knight f6 check, king f8, queen takes g7 check, king takes g7, rook takes h7 check, king f8, and checkmate on the next move, which is knight takes g6. So black played queen g7 instead, and then white played knight e5. This is a dream square for the knight, but it will find an even better one. Now black played queen takes h6, exchanging the queens. Rook takes h6. The correct recapture, such as g takes h6, not only thwarts the attack on h7, but also eliminates the g5 pawn, which could become a sturdy support for a white knight soon. According to Tarash, pieces, not pawns, should occupy weak points or holes in the opponent's positions. Rook f8. If rook f5 instead, then knight takes d5, pawn takes knight, bishop takes pawn, check, king g7, and bishop takes rook on a8. So rook f8 and then knight d7. One golden rule of chess strategy: if a piece is on a good square, find an even better one. Though the knight may seem excellent on e5, Miles rightly sees it's more valuable on f6 for a coordinated attack on the h-file. In chess, it's crucial for all pieces to work together rather than having individual pieces on impressive squares. Now black played rook f7, saves the rook and also defends the second rank. Knight f6 check, and then king h8, the only move. Now white played another good move, bishop h3. Here white wants to checkmate black by playing king d2, then rook dh1, and then rook takes h7 check, rook takes h7, rook takes h7 mate after. However, black can spoil this plan by playing, after king d2, knight e8 instead of bishop h3 right now. So then black either trades knights or forces white's knight to retreat from f6. So before starting this plan, Miles uses an in-between move to stop black from swapping knights. Blocking the h-file with his bishop might seem like it makes the winning plan harder, but sometimes preventing the opponent's plan is more important than rushing to carry out your own idea. Now black played bishop to c8, supporting e6, but also blocking the way of a8 rook, which could have helped black playing knight e8 to exchange white's knight on f6. If instead rook e7 right now, then bishop takes e6 wins a pawn, because if rook takes e6 right now, then it's a checkmate on h7. So after bishop c8, then white played king to d2, moving out of the way of the rook on d1. Now rook to g7, threatening knight f7, attacking the rook, then rook to h4, and then knight takes g5, winning the key pawn. Now white played another good move, f4, defending the g5 pawn. Rook b8, with the idea of rook b7 and strengthen black's second rank. Now white played rook h1. If the white bishop on h3 suddenly disappeared, white would already be close to checkmating in two moves, starting with rook takes h7 check because of the powerful position of the f6 knight. Now black played knight a c4 check. This sidelined knight has wrecked black's position, essentially putting black a piece down for the whole game. Any attempt to counterattack now won't change the outcome. Now white played king d3. By putting the king on d3, white keeps e3 square defended so that black cannot move the knight to e3, then f5 to defend the king side. The king is a strong piece, use it. Now rook b7. If instead knight takes b2 check, then king c2, knight b c4, then bishop takes e6, which with checkmate threat on h7. So he has to bring the other rook to the defense of h7. So rook b b7. Now white played b3. Now the embarrassing black knight is forced back to the rook's file, knight a3. If black is given a free move, he can exchange off his bad knight with knight a b5. So it is time for white to act fast. So white played e4, another good move. This opens a second front in the center which completely overstretches black's defense. D takes e4 check. White wins a pawn as a start after knight a b5. If instead knight a b5, then knight takes knight, and a takes d5. So black captured d takes e4 check. Now white played knight c e4. White recaptures and clears the way for his king. Knight takes e4. If instead of knight takes e4, knight f5, then bishop takes f5, e takes f5, knight d6 attacking the rook, rook b c7, knight takes bishop on c8, rook takes c8, rook takes h7 check, rook takes rook, and then rook takes h7 checkmate. So after knight takes e4, white played king takes e4. In contrast to the black king who is trapped on h8, the white king is able to advance fearlessly. Knight b5. The wandering knight tries again to reach the king's side to aid its struggling king, this time through d6 square. But once more, the brave king, white king, thwarts this plan. Guess what white played? King to e5, another good move. The white king now has a great view of the battlefield. He is safe from any attacks by black pieces and is poised to advance deeper into the enemy's territory to cause chaos. Rook b e7. And black seems to have a strong defense on the light squares on the king side, but usually weakness on one color means weakness on both. Here black has lost control of the dark squares. Now how can white break through? The trick is, when you control squares of one color, try to break through on squares of the opposite color. So now white played bishop to f1. This does the trick. The black knight is attacked, and after knight c7 and then bishop d3, white will checkmate with bishop takes g6, then rook takes g6, rook takes h7 check, rook takes h7, and then rook takes h7 checkmate. So black resigned after bishop f1. Some key principles and lessons learned from this game. Number 1, coordination over material. It's not just about having more pieces, it's about using them effectively together. White's pieces coordinated well to exploit weaknesses in black's position. Number 2, patience and planning. White demonstrated patience in building up their position before launching a decisive attack. Planning ahead and anticipating the opponent's moves were crucial. Number 3 is flexibility in strategy. White adapted their strategy based on the changing dynamics of the game, switching from defense to offense when the opportunity arose. Number 4, exploiting weaknesses. Identifying and exploiting weaknesses in the opponent's position, such as weak squares or poorly placed pieces, can lead to significant advantages. Number 5, control of key squares. Dominating key squares both in the center and on the wings can provide a foundation for launching successful attacks and defending against counter attacks. Number 6 is tactical awareness. Being alert to tactical opportunities such as Zwischenzugs in between moves or unexpected tactical shots can turn the tide of the game in your favor. Number 7, persistence. Despite facing resistance from black's defense, white persisted in finding ways to improve their position and eventually break through. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something from this game as well. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Bye bye.